Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we speak with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations work past the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, we are joined by Khaled Souf, who is a software crafter, crafting software coach at Zenika Montreal based in Canada. Khaled Souf, we're so glad to have you on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Robby, for this session.
So I want to dig into a few topics with you. And before we get too far into some of those other more questions about your background, I do want to talk a little bit about maintainable software just at a high level. What do you believe are a few common characteristics or traits of well-maintained code?
Well, actually, when you check the word maintainable, you're going to find that it's something that you maintain. So it's something that you can evolve, something that you can fix if there is a problem with that. So usually when I'm thinking about maintainable, I'm always saying that it's going to be easy to modify the behavior that have the code, to improve that behavior, and maybe to fix things. It's going to be really easy. And when I'm saying easy, I mean it will not take so much time, and it will not take also so much effort to think about it.
Often there's concerns about developers maybe pre-optimizing. It's like, where's that trying to find that balance there of like making it easier to change in the future. Like, where do you find is a good cutoff point of being like, this is enough for now versus what we may need a year or two down the road when we're evolving these things? How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because if you see how the industry, in the history of the industry, how it works, at some point we started by doing them some designing, some architecture, some stuff, and then we try to implement it. Usually, when you go back to the industry, maybe before the 80s and all the stuff, and even before that, the people, they tend to what we do, over-engineering, because they are thinking about a lot of stuff that maybe it can happen or not. But I think the best way to do it is, let's say, do only what you can work right now and try to do just enough design and architecture to make it work. So, like you said, there is something that at some point you need to compromise. If you know that in the future, and when I say future, it's like after a month, after maybe several weeks, you know that something's going to happen, so you prepare for that. So you prepare your design, your architecture, your things, how it's going to work in that way. But if it is something in a year, you don't do that. Because if you do that, you are not sure that it's going to be used. And maybe you're going to implement something that's going to be almost over-engineered. And sometimes, and even I've seen that in some project, they got so much dead code that, and the reason about the dead code, there are two reasons actually. You have a feature that is, let's say obsolete or deprecated. And the other stuff is we implemented that because we know that we're going to need it in 6 months, but after 6 months, the market already changed and we don't need that anymore. So these are the cases that we have these kind of dead code.
Interesting. And, when you think about dead code and identifying, so you have features that aren't used, and do you think that's often an issue where the product owners didn't really think through it enough, or they didn't promote that set of functionality or feature to whoever the audience or user base is? Do you think there's the responsibility of a developer to try to determine, to detect that information? Like, whose roles does that kind of typically fall under, you see?
Yeah, so if I understand well your question, and if we are talking about how we manage feature, I'm gonna say is usually the product owner also is like some kind of developer. Why? Because they try to experiment some few things and then see if the market, how it's gonna get the feedback from the market. What I think is mostly a product owner has some kind of vision, but he doesn't have a plan. And every time he changes the plan, depending on what he gets as a feedback. And it's the same also for us. When you are trying to implement something and you get a design or architecture, all the stuff, you try some stuff, but you're not sure that is the best way to do it. Because you don't know. And even if you know, maybe you've known that in some kind of context. not with the tools that you have right now, not with the context that you have right now. And I'm not talking about context. I'm usually speaking about the feature itself, the customer. Let's say also when I'm talking about the customer, so the user also. So these kind of change always. That's why usually when I starting doing stuff, I go back to zero and try to reevaluate all the tools that I've been using for maybe a month, all the stuff, because I know that the industry is really evolving too fast. So you need to, at some point, when you get to the point when you try to start something new, there you need to go back and say, hey, okay, so I don't know anything. I go back. I try to see what they made right now in the industry, what's the best way to do it. Let's say what is good practice right now, even in clean code and all the stuff, tomorrow maybe is going to be something that we shouldn't do it. And it can be elsewhere, because one of the cases that I remember well, at some point I remember that the best practice is using some, when you are defining a method or let's say a function or the stuff, you need to put as less parameters as possible. But right now, that thing is obsolete. Why? Because you have your IDE, like IntelliJ, like Visual Code, VS Code, all the stuff. They already manage that. So when you try to create that kind of function, you don't care anymore about that, because the IDE will help you to do it.
Right. So you remember all the different options and things you could be passing to, your function or method and stuff like that. You mentioned also, thinking back on that, the topic around product owners, managers, around, having sets of features that were built and maybe the market's not using it or whatever. Do you think there's an interesting hesitation for teams to remove things that might be perceived as a value add from like a sales perspective? Like, we can check that box off that we have this functionality, but the developers know like nobody's using it. So it's dead code. Should we get rid of this or not? But sometimes that could be part of the overall.
That's really a good question, because right now, when I've seen in the industry that usually when we implement something, we never remove it. And that's really a big issue. I think I've read some, I don't know what is the company, I don't remember right now. They implemented so much things at some point, because the market is evolving. So they keep it, these things. But it's like we said before, it's a dead code. So at some point you need to remove it. And that habit, or maybe that thing that everybody should at some point delete code, I didn't see it often happening in the industry.
Do you use the metaphor technical debt very often?
I try to not use it very often. Why? Because this word is really misused. It's used a lot. I think many people use it to define everything. Everything that is bad, they say that's technical debt, but it is not technical debt. The technical debt is, if you go to the definition, is something like, let's say you have a code, you need to maintain it. When I say maintain it, you need to evolve it or fix a bug. At some point, it's going to be too expensive to maintain it. Why? Because you have a technical debt in that. And what is a technical debt? You've done something, maybe not well designed, maybe there is something missing about that. And at some point, it becomes so much, let's say, complex that when you try to evolve it, when you try to fix something on that, it's going to take you so much time. And that time that you take, let's say, the delta time between if it is good and if it is, let's say, complex, that delta time, that's the technical that you need to pay every time you do it.
And thanks for kind of providing your background, or at least your kind of working definition or understanding of that term. And you also alluded to that people misuse it a lot. Where is the difference between like bad code or just code you disagree with, or maybe code you don't understand? And then could you also argue that tech code that you don't understand when you're reading it or looking at, that is a form of technical debt? Or is it just when people use it in more of like they have a different, like I would have done it differently?
Like I said, if you are speaking about a good or a bad code, I don't like the term good or bad code. I prefer the term maintainable code, and let's say complex maintainable code. So easy maintainable code, complex maintainable code. So Usually, I always put that so I can be more pragmatic about that, because like when you do some, you can hurt somebody feeling when you say it that way, when you say it's good or it's bad. So let's say when I think about the code actually is something that you need to maintain. So it's something you do, let's say every day, every step of day. You need to create some routine to do it, and you need to make that routine, let's say, a part of your process of development. That's the thing that you need to be. So if you go back to the definition, in my case, an easy maintainable code is something that we read. When you try to read, you will not take much time to understand what it does. And also, it's something already tested, so it's robust. So it's something that is really working, and that is working. One of the thing that I do usually, because I think you've already read my resume, so I'm doing a lot of stuff. One of them is sometimes they call me only to do a redesigning or a refactoring of an application, and for like a month or something like that. Only call me for that. And how do I, let's say, measure that if the code is complex or easy? Is how much time do I need to understand how it works? If it takes too much time, I will say, no, this is not good. There is something missing right here. So we need to go back to that. Going back to the notion of maintainable, what I think about the industry is we always compromise about the bad things. So the best way, I think, in my opinion, to compromise is always testing something. Even if design or the architecture is not well designed, that's fine, because when it is tested, you can go back at some point and redesign it or maybe refactor it. And you are sure that you're going to do that very well because you already have your security, what is the test, actually. But if you do a good, readable code, but not tested, at some point, when you go back there, you're going to have what we call the fear of the code. So you're going to fear to modify that code because you don't have any security on it.
And just to clarify on testing, are you primarily referring to, say, automated tests type of suite, or do you think any form of consistent QA testing of the?
Yeah, I'm thinking only about testing automated tests mainly. And when you are talking about automated tests, it can be also on both sides. It can be on the developer side, and it can be in the QA side, but I prefer like everyone in the developer side. Why? Because you have, let's say, a faster feedback loop when you modify or when you update that code.
And I'm going to want to come back and touch on testing a little bit more with you as well. But I'm curious about, just so the audience can get to know a little bit more about you and your background. So at what point in your career as a software engineer did you realize that you wanted to start coaching other developers on improving their code and workflows and things like that?
I think it was like maybe 4 years ago, something like that. But before that, if I go back in my career, is like... when I was like, I have like 4 years of experience or something like that. So it's going to be like almost 8 or 9 years ago. I start thinking that maybe there is somebody who already thinks about how we should work as a developer. So what are the steps? There is maybe some approach. And that's where I discovered crafting software, TDD, extreme programming, and all the stuff. And from there, I started using them, let's say, in all the work that I have. But let me be clear, to do that, at some point, you need some mentors. You need a community, especially community for that. You can do it alone. If you do it alone, that's okay too, but you will miss many things, because I think you learn more from the other than yourself alone. It's usually the case. So that's why I was always active in Paris at that point in the crafting software community. And when I got to Montreal, I already included myself in that. And I think you met already my my friend Nicola Carlo. Actually, we are co-organizing the software crafters there in Montreal. So
Awesome. So did you have some coaches or mentors that you worked with that helped you in a professional capacity where like you're working somewhere and you brought in coaches in that type of thing or consultants to come in or
yeah, let's say if I'm talking about that is we were not in the same staff, so they're working on some other stuff. But usually when you do that, you need what I call some partner in crime. You see, to experiment things, to do things, and usually it's going to be one person, and that person you're gonna work together in many things. You're gonna discuss about that. So my partner in crime, it was I think he's becoming right well known in the industry. He is called Xavier Détang. He's French, and we've been working for maybe 5 or 7 years together. And we always, when you do that stuff, we always do it together. We try to experiment things. We go back to the community to try to try to get feedback from people, all the stuff. So there is two types of things. If you are lucky enough, you're gonna get mentors, and if you are not lucky, like myself, because I didn't get mentors, because the mentors, they were like there wasn't too much mentors. So I've become a mentor myself after several years, and then at some point it changed completely how my way of work, because right now I'm always switching between the roles of a senior developer to a crafting software coach and always I try always to switching between the two roles. Why? Because I don't want to become that crafting software coach who is like an ivory tower or something like that. I need at some point to go back. And also I need some time to experiment few things. And that's what I do usually in the community.
Nice. Yeah, I'm always curious about how people's different journeys to getting into that world. And I think it's interesting, you touched on the point of that it's important for you to know that you still spend time in code to live and breathe in that world and experiment. And so that way you're not feeling like you're disconnected when you go to tell other or help coach other people on how to do things. It's an interesting balance there. It's even like just as people evolve in their career where they might move into more of like a tech lead role or something, and they don't feel like they're getting to spend as much time coding as they used to because they're navigating the other complexities. And I think a way that I've heard that phrased by a few people is like you become like a multiplier in that you're helping enable other people to do a bunch of work versus just what you can individually as a solo or just an individual contributor can produce within the context of a software project. Do you have any advice for those listening that are kind of curious, like they're maybe junior, mid-level people in their career at this point, but they're thinking like, what's my career trajectory looking like? Do you have some suggestions on like if they were curious to learn about maybe at some point I would like to find myself being a good mentor or a coach or training people on how to do things? What are some steps that they can kind of take to maybe start dipping their toes into that to see if it's maybe a good fit for them long term? But
yeah, so let's say if I'm going to talk about that, I'm going to talk mostly about my journey. It can be different from persons like you said. I think the best way to start with is to get to the community, to the local community. If a community doesn't exist, create one. So that's the stuff, because I know always every time I go from a community to another, even in places that there is always what I call people that I call hidden gems. Say they didn't find maybe let's say a community, but they're already working on that. So they read books, they watch videos about all the known the known mentors that there. But start with the community, and from the community start working with somebody who is he gonna be like your pair in every pair programming, your guy that I said guy, but I know in both gender. I'm sorry about that. Let's say your partner in everything that you want to experiment and all the stuff, and try to find that person in work and even outside work also. That's what I usually, and there is so much material, books especially, and videos. And you need to go there. So there is the books of Kent Beck about Uncle Bob, about Sandro Mancuso. There are so much material already in internet. So, but don't do it alone. Always. That's the biggest advice that I give. Don't do it alone. Do it with somebody else, because when you do it with somebody else, you're gonna have some different perspective about that, and you're gonna learn a lot about how to do that in different way, that your way. That's the biggest advice that I can give.
Hi there. Do you know someone who might be looking for assistance with their Ruby on Rails application? Planet Argon would love to meet them. We're offering a $1,000 referral bonus. Send someone our way, and if they sign up for services with Planet Argon, we'll give them a $1,000 discount. And in return, you'll get a check for $1,000 in the mail, just for knowing the right person. Hop on over to planetargon.com/referrals for more information and to refer someone our way. That's planetargon.com/referrals. Thanks.
Thanks for kind of digging in and sharing more about your journey there. I'm curious, now that we're in these pandemic times, the importance of local community, but also seemingly feeling like it's more difficult to do that in some areas of the world right now. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of materials and things to learn online, and I like that angle of just don't do it alone. Find someone, and you said earlier, a partner in crime to kind of learn and bounce ideas off of and grow together, I suppose. What do you believe are important things to keep in mind? When you are, I'm assuming as a coach and consultant, you are diving into other people's code bases on a regular basis. And so you're a guest in someone else's, like, you're not going to be there forever, probably on this project. You're coming in for a period of time. You have a contract or whatever the arrangement is. You come in. What are some things that you think is important for developers to keep in mind when they're taking those first steps into looking at someone else's code base, and also both on a technical and, say, social level with the existing team?
Yeah, so I think the first step, what I usually do is try to tell people that I'm not there to say that they're doing, let's say, a bad job. So that's why I try not to use the term bad or good or something like that. And also, in the first days, I will try to pair program with what we call the dungeon master. The dungeon master usually is a senior developer, or maybe the older developer in that application, and he knows every stuff about that. So I try to pair program with him to understand why he is doing that way. Maybe he doesn't know, and sometimes because also they get some pressure. Let's say they are pressured from the management and all the stuff. So the solution that I give when I'm refactoring or redesigning is going to be a short-term solution. But you need also to think about the long-term solution. And like you said before, the thing is not mostly about the code. It can be something that about the organization not working well. So that's why I know that I need to do that short-term stuff, so I do it. I try to diffuse as much as possible knowledge. And when I'm doing that, I always try to do it in a way that is going to be helpful for the developers that I'm working with, and also in a way that I'm not the teacher, they are not the student. We're trying to working this together. That's how I introduce myself. So I'm always, when somebody asking me what you are doing, I never say that I'm training developer or something like that. I say, hey, I'm just here to try to help. So it's always that kind of mindset that you need to keep when you are working that way. And like I said, on a social level, if you read the books about crafting software, about the attitude and all the stuff, you never play the game alone. So you need to play with others. So you need to understand the others. And you need also to improve the others when you are there. And usually, if I've done my work well, I'm always try to get these people to the community too. So that's how I usually do it.
It's interesting. Invite them into your world, and that can help foster that. Do you, in those types of engagements, are you feeling like? And I've heard different people answer this in different ways, and just in terms of like, it's like some people want to go into an environment, and it's like, is as a consultant or a coach or whatever the capacity, and in some ways you're trying to help that team help themselves in a lot of ways, and so trying to be mindful to say maybe not end that project or engagement feeling like with the stakeholders or whoever, feeling like, wow, we couldn't have done it without that person, but like, what has the team been able to accomplish since that person's been part of it? And then it's like is an effective consultant someone that can kind of help elevate the team and kind of be, in a weird, maybe in an odd way, not be seen as the hero? It's the team is now that is the hero at this point, because they've been able to step up and deliver, because that's what the organization needs long term, right?
So I hate that let's call it the anti-patterns of hero. So I found it a lot in many teams. So what I try to do is creating some space. The knowledge can be shared between all of them. Creating also some space that they can work together in the code. Because usually what I found, let's say a non-maintainable code or a bad maintainable code is done because everybody is working on the code alone without any feedback from the others. I try always to create, like I say, when I'm talking about space, I'm talking about time, about maybe something that's going to be done regularly, like a mob session programming every week, pair programming when they can. And I try to push this practice. And then from there, I go, when I see that everybody is open and everybody they are less, let's say, in the defensive way, because usually when you are trying to touch the code of the others, they don't like it. So when they starting to trust me, that's the thing, they starting to trust me. Then I go and say, okay, so now we're going to start and see the technique that we can learn. And we do it in the more programming session and also pairing with them. And the thing that I'm always doing is I'm trying to pair program with them in their project, so they know that I know my stuff and I'm not talking about something theoretical or something like that. Because that's also the let's say, the thing that the people they are thinking about. If you start talking about TDD, about techniques, all the stuff, they say, hey, yes, but that's not the real world. So usually I say, okay, let's do it in the real world. So let's go.
You learn these types of say best practices over a period of time. I'm assuming you didn't just wake up one day and be like, oh, I know exactly how to navigate being a really good coach or consultant coming in. So do you recall any mistakes you made early on that you're like, nah, I wouldn't do that again?
Yeah, sure, a lot. I've done a lot of mistakes in my career, but that's okay too, because every time I do that and try to do some retrospective about that and how I can improve myself so I can do it better. And I will still making mistakes even right now, so that's okay. One of the biggest mistakes I've been making, I think it was the first mission that I've been doing coaching. I was like talking to people directly to say, hey, this is good, is bad, we shouldn't do that, the best technique is that way, the thing about that way. And also when I recall about that, I was always in that thing that I was thinking that there is only one way to do it, but it's never the case. It always, they have so many ways to do it better. So I started to shift from somebody who is here for the code to somebody who is here for the developers. And then the code is going to go after that. Because the main problem is the organization, maybe the team, how the team is working. So if you manage to solve that issue, you manage to improve the code in the long term.
I think that's really important. Do you, I want to, as I mentioned earlier, I want to circle back on testing a bit. And so Is it safe to assume you sometimes join projects where there's maybe a lack of any tests or just no tests whatsoever at that point? And like, how do you help a team? It is a common problem that I've seen with working with different teams, is that like there might have been maybe someone along the way that had maybe started writing some automated tests when they kind of abandoned it for whatever reason, and the other people didn't really know what to do and pick it up because they had some problems with it. And now they have this large application and they've never been able to really figure out, well, where can we start really producing some tests when there's so like a really healthy test suite relies on a lot of doing it along the way sometimes. And so how do you start implementing that as a process, and where do you get tactical in that sense of like, okay, let's start creating a test suite when one didn't exist?
Yeah. So mainly when it's starting to when the test actually, they get another definition, is the first user of your code. So if it is hard to test, so your code is too complex. So the best indicator to know if a code is maintainable or not is the test. That's what I do. And starting from there, I go, like you say, to them and try to get if there is existing tests, maybe banned, maybe let's say deprecated, maybe something like that, and try to understand the reason why they didn't keep it. And usually, like you said, there's going to be somebody done that in alone. At some point, they didn't understand what he did. So at some point, we need to maintain these tests because we need to change the code. And at some point, they remove them. So the cause of the problem is not the test itself. It is because somebody done that, did not communicate to the others, or maybe we have different level of expertise in that. And because the people, they tend to not ask others because they fear that they're going to be judged. And at some point, they remove that.
Right. Do you, as you're entering any of these scenarios, are there some common challenges that you find right away with getting set up in that environment and working on that new to you code base that are things that you look for? And you're like, I always feel like I have to make these first few contributions to, this or that, because it is often overlooked by a team because they don't have guests very often, or no one's needed to be onboarded in a while.
Usually I try to get, when you have the code, you have different use cases implemented in that code. I try to pick the simplest one. I try to get an example with all the, let's say, the type of test that we need to do, and I do it in that one. And I make that focus on how testing in a simple case. And then when we go to the complex case, I know that we already mastered that with the team. And when you go there, they are more confident because they know the test, they know the code, they know everything. So I try to not make many variables when we try to start something. Always, let's say, that's the thing that I usually do also in TDD. When you are trying to learn maybe something new, like a new language or all the stuff, I try to figure out, I have always 3 variables. Do I know the kata, the exercise? Do I know the technique? So it's going to be TDD. And do I know the language? If I know TDD and the exercise, for example, I'm going to give you an example like Harry Potter kata. So I'm gonna change the language and try to learn the language. If I know the language and I know the kata and I don't know TDD, so that's the thing, is to learn TDD. So usually always focus on one thing. Don't focus on many. So if you start, for example, a project that you need to maintain, take the simplest example, try to put a test on it, try to create your strategy of test, and then from there, you're going to propagate it to the complex one, to the complex code, because you already have configured your tests and all the stuff, so you need to add them.
I wanted to quickly circle back. You just mentioned the Harry Potter kata, and I'm not familiar with that. And
that's the thing that I learned from the community, actually. You never find that in a book. Maybe the one book that was talking about is the book of Emily Bash. That is, I think, Coding Dojo. So the term actually started in France. So it's usually, what is a Coding Dojo is you take some kind of small exercise small, let's say, specification or a problem. And from there, you're going to practice something. You're going to practice maybe a technique, maybe a language. And that's what actually a coding dojo. So from a coding dojo, you have many types. You have the kata. The kata is something that somebody gonna do something and everybody do the same thing. So I'm gonna write the test. Everybody write the test. It's coming from the martial arts. So that's why we are using the same term as them. And usually when I start to do that, when I'm talking about TDD, we start with these small exercises to get a bit of, let's say, technical, practical and theoretical thing, but in a small case, and that's really interesting because these kind of exercise they don't take more than an hour or 2 hours. So it's just small enough to know something and to practice something. So that's why I'm usually using them. And then from there, like I said, I move to the real world, so to the real code, and we start to practice that in the real world. So if I'm talking about kata, usually you get many types of them. You get one for TDD, you get many for TDD, you get many for refactoring, all the stuff. And the best repository that you're gonna find about them is the repository actually of Emily Bash. So it's well known. So she got almost every kata there.
We'll be back with our interview with Khaled in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for making time to listen to the Maintainable Software Podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Also, do you know someone in the industry that I should be speaking with on Maintainable? Shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm. And now, back to our interview with Khaled Souf. Earlier on, you had touched on, when it came to maintainable code being easy to make changes to, and how do you determine what is easy or not without it feeling too subjective? Is it just the fact that you're needing to spend a lot of time on making the change? And you mentioned, because you did touch on time quite a bit, or is there some other ways you're kind of looking at that?
Yeah, so there are, I think, a few techniques that I learned actually from the book of Michael Feathers, working very effectively with legacy code like Sprout method, Sprout class, and all the stuff. The best technique that I use when I'm starting a project is what we call scratch refactoring. So what is really amazing about Git actually that you can do what we call a checkout of the SHA-1, and you go what we call in experimental way, because I know I'm gonna throw that after I did it. So to understand how the code is working, I run it. I try to move some stuff to understand how it works, and at some point I go back because I already understand how it's working. So I never start with a test actually when I'm doing that. Why? Because I know that everything that I'm doing is only in experimental way, and I'm going back to the code after that. And then I start doing tests.
Do you find yourself more often on team rewrite or team refactor?
That's an interesting question. Usually I'm always in the team redesigning, not the team refactoring, because let's say I did have the case actually when I'm pair program with other people, but when I'm going to like I say, to the contract of 1 month, I need to refactor. Actually, it's not 1 month to refactor, it's 1 month to redesign. But when I'm coaching people, mostly it's going to be refactoring. It will not be redesigning. Usually, I do with them the refactoring, and then I ask them to, if they'd like to go further, they can redesign.
Just so I understand, as redesign, do you see a fundamental difference between like a full rewrite versus a redesign?
Yes, you're right. I didn't talk about that. So a full rewrite is going to be, we remove everything and we go from the start. But our start point is we understand the business and we go there. Let's say a redesign is we get an existing code and we understand mostly what it's gonna do. So in every part that we do, we're gonna, let's say we get the test, we remove that code and we start implementing that code with the design that we have in mind. That's my own definition, but I'm not sure it's the good one or not.
No, that's helpful to get that distinction there. I'm always curious about, usually I think most of the guests, given that we talk about maintainable code, rewrites are not often the thing that people respond with. Like, oh, I'm always more on the idea of like wanting to rewrite something, because I think a lot of people know that rewrites are oftentimes horrible experiences, or they're not very successful at times. And have you had effective or successful rewrites? And what do you feel like there was some prerequisites to make that successful, or?
Like you said, 99% it will not gonna work if you are rewriting. But I think I have some successful experience about that, and it was successful because actually we reworked on the business side also, because we know that something is obsolete and all the stuff. So when you do the rewriting, you need to go in production as fast as possible. That's the thing that you need to do. You will not keep them diverged let's say, for a long time. Because if you do that, at some point, what you have rewritten, you're going to throw it to the trash. Usually that's the case it's like if I try to get, let's say, to try to have some example, or maybe not some example, but something similar is like having a long-term branching it. You shouldn't do that.
It becomes really difficult to merge that later or to migrate, or
yeah.
A lot of projects are, you end up in a scenario where you're working on a new thing and then you also have to be responsible for taking care of the old thing, which is still the current thing. And so there's an interesting balance there.
Yeah, the other thing also I remember is sometimes when you do that, mostly I've heard, let's say, when I've done that, I've heard some managers saying, hey, we need to throw that, but in the same time, they're maintaining it. So it's kind of, they don't know what they need actually. They are trying to evolve the old one, but they know that they need to go to the new one. So
as someone that works with a lot of different developers and as a consultant and coach, do you ever find yourself in scenarios where there's someone on you're talking to, and they feel like you're helping highlight some concerns that they've had for a while, and they said, well, I feel like I've tried to help advocate for, like, we need to really upgrade this, or we need to take care of like improving our test suite, or improve some aspect of our application, but stakeholders saying not right now, maybe a few many times. And so they start to translate that as like, we're never going to do it, or someday maybe is never happening. And so they've stopped asking or bringing it up. What advice would you offer them on how to get over that, and maybe to start bringing those conversations up with stakeholders to hopefully get the buy-in to start addressing those concerns?
That's actually the complex part of when you are coaching, because it's not always to convince the developer is going to be always convince the stakeholder. So usually I give them some statics and try to explain to them that actually they get what we call the feedback loop. And I say, hey, so you know that feature is going to take 6 months. So if you work on that, it's going to take less time. I don't know how. I will not tell you a number, but I know that if we rework on that, after that, the work is going to be faster and you're going to have more feature about that. But you need to know that usually what I negotiate is the time to do, let's say, the refactoring and the rewriting. I'll also, for the long term, I try to get like 10% or 20% of the time to the team, even after I'm gone. Usually I told them that, that it's taking 6 months, but before it was taking 1 month. Why? Because we didn't manage to do that. And also, when you do that, we should know also that sometimes the problem not always in the side of stakeholders. Sometimes it's the developer side, because they try to do things better, so they try to get faster, but They will not put the test. They will not put the things. So the developer also at some point when they try to estimate, even I don't like the word estimate, but usually that's the case. When you try to estimate things, they need to put in consideration that when you are estimating developing something, that you need to also include in that the time that you are doing that with all the tests that you need to be done.
I think that's always an interesting thing when people talk about like, well, I don't have enough time for tests, and then try not to be overly rhetorical, but just how do you know it worked? How do you know your code works?
Yeah. That's the thing. And also, when you are saying coding, it includes testing. So that's why even the stakeholder, the manager of they shouldn't even know that there are tests they are existing. They are for the developers. So the developers, they need to include that in their work. And also, because when you say, hey, when a manager or maybe a stakeholder, they're going to ask you why it takes so much time, you're going to say, hey, because I'm testing it. That's not a good reason. You shouldn't say that. You say it's too complex or something like that, because the test includes some hidden reason, and you need to give that hidden reason. He shouldn't know how you work, because it's not also, he shouldn't know the details. You're going to give him something, it takes so much time because we have something that we do or we get that issue or the stuff. But the issue is never the test.
It's like the conversation around with teams being, how do you define what done is? And that needs to be more of the developer's responsibility to determine that, not the stakeholders.
Exactly. That's what I usually doing. When I start with the team, I always ask them, okay, we're going to define what you call the definition of ready. So we know that when you get something, you understand it well, you have every element to developer, and the definition of done. So what is done for you is going to be tested, it's going to be deployed, it's going to be, I don't know, maybe merged and all the stuff. And it depends on the team because it's always different from a team to another because of the context of all the stuff. But there is something that I always add as a coach is testing.
Yeah, it's important. All right, well, just a couple of quick last questions for you. This one, when I like to get to know people a little bit more, maybe, what non-software development related book do you find yourself often recommending to people in the industry?
Non-software development. Okay. I think it's called Designing System. I started reading it right now. The first page. I started today doing it because I was reading another book. But why did I buy that book? Because in one of the podcasts, I think I heard Ken Beck speaking about that. It's going to be really interesting, especially when you are doing coaching, because you're going to think about it as systems, not only individuals.
Well, great. So where can listeners best follow your thoughts on software development online?
Yeah, usually I'm very active in Twitter. So I got the whole community there, but also on LinkedIn. I have my website. Actually started writing some few blog posts, but let me be clear about that. I'm really lazy person to do that. I'm always focusing on doing stuff, on honing my skills, and less on sharing, but I starting sharing more and more right now. And I hope it's going to help people.
Well, excellent. I mean, that's and joining us today on Maintainable is part of that journey for you as well. So thanks for sharing. It's been such a delight having you on Maintainable, Khaled. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Robby.
Maintainable.